A warm welcome here at THEKI, your podcast for consciousness, health, and happiness. My name is Sandra, and I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're going to talk about the topic of narcissism and explore it from an energetic perspective. The topic might seem very complex at first, but it's actually quite simple to grasp, especially if you've already looked into a few topics like the ego, its layers, and so on. If you're interested in this topic, you're probably dealing with narcissists rather than suspecting you might be one yourself. And that's why I've geared this podcast more towards that perspective. So this podcast is less for narcissists and more for people who have the feeling that they might have a narcissist in their circle or are completely sure of it and are also saying, wow, I need help to deal with this more competently or maybe to free myself from certain patterns. I'll explain later why I chose this perspective. It's simply more likely. But later on, we'll also look at the perspective of narcissism directly. So definitely stick around. The goal of this podcast is that through a deep understanding of narcissism and your own role in it, these are always mirror roles, combined with a few insights that I want to give you and also tricks for how you can stay out of this game, that you'll be able to hold your own field no matter what is happening or what the narcissist is doing. Because there are different strategies that the narcissist can pull out, and they are often very surprising. But once you've seen through it, then you can hold your field. Yeah, and it's also important to me to say right at the beginning that this is not, and I mean really not, about judging the narcissist. From a higher perspective, there are no perpetrators and victims. It always looks as if the narcissist is the perpetrator and he has his victims, but in reality, it's an invitation to find balance within, which is often only possible through the path of recognition. What I've noticed is that in this day and age, the word narcissism is used very often, and sometimes where it doesn't belong, sometimes in a truly unjustified way. Sometimes it's even used as a kind of swear word or deliberately used to disempower others so that they first have to explain why they aren't narcissists. Not everyone with strong self-confidence is a narcissist, but we'll analyze that later. I also had the feeling that this word, this diagnosis, this engagement with the topic is very present in many people's fields right now, because it's also about healing the collective fields. I've spoken about collective fields in other podcasts and explained it more deeply, which I won't do now, but it's clearly about this field now and that we can simply heal, resolve, and transform a lot there. Even those who aren't directly affected but are somehow interested or feel addressed can also contribute a lot of good. There are also, and I want to say this before we start, forms of narcissism with very different levels of severity. So there's a very extreme, strong narcissism and then more subtle forms. And so the examples I'll give you later apply to all narcissists, but they are indeed expressed to completely different degrees. It should just become clear what kind of behavioral patterns and instincts are at work in narcissists, so you can then understand the mechanism of this interaction and ultimately, of course, the possibility of your own liberation. At the end, I'll clarify what drives the narcissist, and I'll also answer the question of whether narcissists can also heal or if they are hopelessly lost. Yes, and it's also important for me to say, before we really get started, that although I talk about narcissists, this is by no means limited to men. There are about as many female as male narcissists. Men are diagnosed as narcissists more often, but that's generally because it's more obvious with them. So with men, the so-called grandiose narcissism is usually more pronounced, and that is dominant and easier to recognize. Whereas women tend more towards vulnerable or covert narcissism, and that isn't recognized as easily and therefore isn't diagnosed as often. But it should be about 50-50. Okay, are you ready? Then let's get started. A narcissist, what is that exactly? I've put together a few examples. As I said, the severity varies greatly, but as a rule, narcissists have a great need for validation, admiration, and recognition. And through this, they also generate a degree of power and control over others and, of course, over their own lives. They use it to build their own world. And they usually have good strategies to get all of that, the admiration, the recognition, and so on, because they have their strategies, because they know how to get it. They always steer the conversation back to themselves, constantly seeking some kind of validation. This causes their brain, and you have to know this, real chemical processes are at play, to release dopamine as part of its reward system. And so they just feel good, and it feels right to keep doing it, which is what they do. As a rule, they are not particularly open to criticism. So they usually react angrily and defensively to any kind of criticism, or they're so good at turning it around, you know? It looks like they're accepting the criticism at first, but then they twist everything so that suddenly the other person is the one being criticized. Narcissists don't like to self-reflect. They don't consider whether they themselves might be wrong, or if they've just behaved strangely, if they were unfriendly or even very hurtful. In other words, the damage their behavior has caused others. Sometimes they're just called charmingly cheeky, but that's putting it very nicely, because they can completely tear you down one day, and the next day they'll come along with some flippant remark and a charming smile, as if nothing ever happened. And yes, for them it wasn't a big deal, unlike for the person who had to endure it. Self-reflection or consideration for others, they actually see that more as a weakness. So it doesn't register with them, but when others show it, they see it as a weakness that they, in turn, can exploit. In fact, that's a strength of narcissists. They like to probe the weak spots of others and then use them to gain control. And sometimes it's a downright exploitation of other people to gain their own advantages, depending on how pronounced it is, as I said. As a rule, however, narcissists are not aware of how manipulative and harmful their behavior actually is, precisely because they don't self-reflect. They also have very, very little to no empathy at all, but it sometimes looks that way because they're good at faking it. But it's not real, and you notice that over time. Narcissists tend to alleviate their own tensions by belittling, insulting, shaming, or making others feel guilty. This gives them a good feeling in the moment, and I have to say it again and again, very few narcissists actually have malicious intentions. So it's not necessarily meant to be malicious. We'll get to that later. I know with these characteristics right now, the narcissist doesn't come off well at first, but we'll unpack that a bit more at the end. So this constant putting others down, making them feel small, to feel better about themselves, that feeling only lasts for a short time. Then the whole thing is smoothed over with a flippant remark or a charming smile, and then it starts all over again and again. We can say, in short, that narcissism is based on inner wounds and distortions. Although narcissists usually appear strong and very self-confident, they are actually very fragile on the inside. Especially when others are strong, they can't handle that very well. They tend to avoid strong people. They prefer to seek out those in whom they've already identified weaknesses that can be exploited. So you can really say that narcissism itself, the diagnosis or the illness or whatever you want to call it, it's all protective layers. It's armor made up of different layers of ego. You could say the narcissist simply has a very, very pronounced, strong ego that is not to be challenged at all. But we'll get to that in more detail later. Let's move on to the interaction between perhaps you or other people and the narcissist. Maybe you've already recognized a few things. How do they treat you? Narcissism becomes even more apparent in closer relationships, especially, of course, when we live together in families or partnerships. I'd like to list a few examples. So, it's actually true that narcissists feed on, I'll just say it, your energy by making accusations, by presenting themselves as great, highlighting themselves, all the things they can do, everything they've had to endure and accomplish, and so on. So it's always about admiration, guilt, or whatever else. And through that, energy flows to them from others. They want to create dramas that aren't really there. Often narcissists treat you like a child, very condescendingly, and they'll say things like, oh, don't be so sensitive, or don't take everything to heart. Or they'll assign blame, make you feel guilty, like, after everything I've done for you, this is how you act. They want to make you feel small. You're responsible for this. You've messed it up again. You couldn't handle it again. Everything went wrong because of you, right? You often hear things like that from narcissists. They are often just little jabs and provocations, either to get a reaction out of you because it's all about your feelings, or to make you feel small. Yes, you have to understand, whenever you react, whether it's with guilt, with anger, with justification, with admiration, no matter what, you always release energy. Whenever you react emotionally, you release energy. And this energy flows directly to him. And that's exactly what he feeds on. That's why we often talk about someone feeding on our energy. But of course, we are also partly responsible. We can allow it or we can stop it. Yes? But let's stick with these examples for now. Narcissists also like to play the role of the savior by making you believe that you'd be lost without them. In a way like, I know you better than you know yourself. I know what's good for you. I only want what's best for you. Or even, no one loves you more than I do. Things like that. He also likes to twist your own words around in discussions so that the outcome is always different from what you meant. And the discussion about clarifying things then takes up so many of your resources that you're completely exhausted in the end. You're empty and you still wouldn't be understood. Why not? Because the narcissist doesn't want you to be. It was never his intention. He just wanted to lull you and put you on the defensive. It's a brilliant strategy to never let the conversation get deeper and never reach the point that would become dangerous or uncomfortable for him. Through all the apparent misunderstandings which he creates himself, you both stay on the surface. You're left having to explain yourself and you lose energy, which goes directly to him. And ultimately, he emerges as the winner, at least energetically, from this conversation. It can also happen that you make decisions that are not to the narcissist's advantage. And then he wants to influence you there too. Yes, then come certain phrases that are meant to make you feel insecure again. In a way like, if you say so, but I don't have a very good feeling about this, or something like that. Or you're going to do your own thing anyway and don't need me, right? So it's meant to make you feel a little bad. You're supposed to, yes, not go your own way. His brain thrives on repetition, and his pattern meshes perfectly with yours. So he has strategies that perfectly align with your weaknesses. For example, his accusations perfectly match your inner feelings of guilt, because that's where you're easily triggered, since you already have those feelings. And when he makes accusations, you immediately fall into that familiar feeling. Or his supposed strength, I should say, because he isn't really strong, but he appears to be. He presents himself that way, and that can resonate strongly with your inferiority complexes. He has power and control over you whenever you emotionally engage with his actions. The fears, guilt, inferiority complexes, whatever is released in you, goes directly to him as pure energy. And all of this causes you to no longer trust yourself. You eventually start to feel weak and needy, or guilty, anxious, inferior, whatever it may be. And it just keeps pulling you down. You might find yourself doubting yourself often, doubting your own mind, your own perception, and of course, your own intuition. Below this podcast, it just occurred to me, I'll also link one of my older podcasts. It's called The Fight for Life Force Energy. It's not directly about narcissism, but it explains in great detail and with many examples how we lose energy throughout the day in various dynamics and interactions with other people, or how we can reclaim it. And of course, I always include tips on how we can better stay in balance. And now let's get to the more solution-oriented passages. What's the best way to deal with him? And I want to tell you right away, it's a journey to yourself. It's not about external strategies. You can use them, yes, they can help you, but it's about a solution and a transformation deep within you. You'll probably reach a point where you realize you just can't go on. By always having to explain, defend, and justify yourself, you lose immense amounts of energy that always flow to him, making him feel even stronger. And yes, you can compare it to turning all the heaters on full blast in winter while opening all the windows. All your precious energy just flies out the window. It's your challenge, and only you can do it, no one else. To be much, much more mindful of your own energy and to act consciously from within instead of just reacting to the narcissist's drama. It was Carl Jung who said that the only thing the narcissist fears is your indifference. It's not your anger, your attempts to set boundaries. It's not your brilliant arguments. All of that plays right into his hands because that's how he gets your energy. The only thing that can disarm him is indifference. Not every action deserves a reaction, and not every attack deserves a defense. And of course, I'm well aware that when you're stuck in the middle of it, it's not so simple to act differently, because your reaction patterns are triggers that are deeply rooted in you. But that's why it can only be a deep healing process within you, a journey to your true self that saves you. You can free yourself from the very triggers the narcissist sets off by following them to their root. Observe yourself very closely. What is the narcissist mirroring to you? What typically narcissistic strategies does he use? Drama to get attention? Why do you react to it? Where does this feel familiar, and why do you feel compelled to respond? Or does he use accusations to belittle you? Why do you explain yourself? Why do you defend yourself? Where is the root? Where do these feelings of guilt come from? Does he belittle you? Where do you know that from? Were there people in your life who have always behaved this way towards you? Are there childhood patterns? Was your father, your mother, or another caregiver perhaps also someone with narcissistic traits? Look at your inferiority complexes, your fears, and your feelings of guilt, and transform the causes. Then you no longer resonate with the narcissist's behavior patterns, and that's the point. It's not about feigned indifference. You can't maintain that for long. But when you truly no longer resonate because the issues within you are healed, then you suddenly realize he can say whatever he wants. It no longer affects you. You no longer have to react in any of the old ways. Narcissists also very often use the drama triangle, where they alternate between the roles of perpetrator, victim, and rescuer. Of course, the narcissist prefers the role of perpetrator or rescuer because he can shine better there, and you're supposed to be the victim. But what's striking about narcissists is that they often switch roles. And these are also strategies. especially when you're getting strong and they start playing the victim, you become weak again because you have a savior complex or whatever. And then they've got you again. Then they can go back to using their usual strategies. So this role switching, it can be very confusing. And if you only react, the perpetrator pushes you into the victim role. The victim pushes you into the rescuer role and so on. You become a pawn, completely losing your self-determination. In that case, it's really important to see through the drama triangle, to understand the roles, and to realize that you are none of them. You're just repeatedly taking on roles that are assigned to you. You can step out of it, you can rise above the drama triangle. Then you'll recognize his roles, but you'll remain largely unimpressed by them. It's not about analyzing the narcissist, but about analyzing yourself. Yes, and nothing is set in stone. You can heal internally, free yourself, and then gradually have the uplifting experience of how the patterns and all the narcissist's strategies just slide off you, like off a Teflon coating. The little buttons he used to be able to push, they just don't exist anymore. And the clearer you are within yourself, the more clearly you suddenly see his programs, his strategies, his wounds, and you can leave them with him instead of feeding him with your precious life force energy. At this point, I'd just like to mention, for those who might be new to my channel and haven't heard much from me yet, of course, I don't just talk about these things. I also always provide a lot of tools through my method, THEKI, which you can learn from me online in live seminars, however you prefer, and also from some other teachers that I've trained. And with that, you're well equipped. With it, you learn how to resolve trauma, how to get to the root cause of your feelings of inferiority, guilt, or whatever else comes up. You learn how to resolve what has perhaps been enslaving you your whole life. And how can I keep my balance, maintain my energy? Of course, THEKI is much, much more. It's not just about resolving and transforming, but it's actually also about great activations within us. Feel free to check out my homepage. I've linked everything below. But now let's get to the practical tips that can help you in acute situations to hold your ground relatively elegantly. Because sometimes we also need to know, okay, if I want to stay out there and not enter the field, what could I do then? It is very important to get used to dancing with your own perception again, to trusting your own perception more and more. Don't let anyone tell you that you're wrong, that you're too sensitive, and so on. If it feels that way to you, if it feels right to you, then it most likely is right. Don't get involved in the discussions if he tries to lure you back into the topic with something, but you already know which direction it's going in anyway. Just say something like that. Yes, that's your opinion. I see it a little differently, or that's an interesting viewpoint. Stay outside. Don't get in, observe instead of reacting immediately. Stay calm. Be aware that he wants to test you, that he wants to draw you out of your shell. If you are aware of this, then you are already in a completely different position than before. Observe yourself much more than him. Observe yourself during all of this and notice where you are still triggered, where you are still clinging, and then you can use THEKI to transform everything that still disturbs your peace. And then the whole thing becomes your playing field. According to your rules which you set, it is no longer his playing field. Then it's yours. It's really about not getting involved in his games. The best thing you can do is maintain some emotional distance, which is to keep your ground clear and practically throw him back on himself. Because if he can no longer receive emotions from you, then he will be thrown back on himself. He can no longer feed on your energy. Then he might look around to see whose energy he can feed on now, because he doesn't want to touch himself. Your inner peace is the biggest trigger for him, because you're essentially depriving him of his drug. Your feelings, your emotions, your reactions, those are his drugs. Do you understand? It can no longer feed on your emotional reaction. your anger, your sadness, your confusion, your insecurity, because you simply no longer give away that energy. You're maintaining it now. And then he'll try to provoke you somehow. He'll want to throw you off balance to regain power over you. But if you don't react emotionally, then, as I said, you're like Teflon. He can't get a grip on you, can't find a weak spot. And, well, he'll probably think of other strategies, but for that moment, it's over. The fewer trigger points you have, the more uncontrollable you become for him. And strictly speaking, you could now control him. But luckily, you don't care about that, and that irritates him even more. He might also occasionally play the victim to throw you even more off balance. Something like, "You've hurt me now, you're so selfish." But those aren't real feelings. That's the strategy of his ego layers, the strategy of his protective armor. And you just have to realize that in those moments, so you don't let yourself get pulled into it. Yes, you can have compassion for this person, but not for these roles he's trying to impose on you. So always be aware of that. It helps you not to step into those roles. Define your boundaries, hold your space. You are not responsible for his emotions. You are only responsible for yourself. Hold your space. With narcissists, it's also noticeable that external things are very important to them, like material things, possessions, their appearance, of course money, prestige, their reputation, being popular, whatever. But if you show him that you're not particularly interested in that, or that you don't need it to be happy, then you're already taking away a large part of his foundation for always presenting himself as great and feeling important. When he knows he can't impress you with these things, a lot of that just falls away. The more clearly you hold your space, the more you become a mirror for him. If you stay calm and simply communicate, "Hey, that's not my problem right now," or "I don't have time for this topic right now," or "I don't feel like having this conversation," then he's always thrown back on himself. And that creates a mixture in him, you could really say, of anger and desperation, because his script isn't working anymore, and he doesn't have another one. Maybe he'll react with even more accusations, with contempt, with anger, whatever. And maybe then you won't react at all anymore. You won't explain yourself, you won't justify yourself, you'll just stay calm. Maybe you even smile. You understand what programs are running inside him, but you don't engage anymore. You no longer accept the blame. You're not desperately trying to save your relationship. Maybe you even leave the situation in that moment, or even the entire relationship if it has become too toxic. You're no longer a victim, you're no longer helpless and at their mercy, you are self-empowered again. That's where all of this leads you. If you really work on yourself, make it absolutely clear to yourself, you are neither cold nor unfriendly just because you're holding your space and paying attention to energetic purity within it. In that case, the issue isn't with you, but with the narcissist, who can't handle it because it's a disadvantage for him when he can no longer feed on your emotions, you know? And I want to warn you about something. Some narcissists have one last trick up their sleeve. When you've managed to develop this strength more and more, so the narcissist simply notices that you've become stronger and he's losing control over you, it's possible that a final emergency program will be launched. Specifically, he will try to convince you that the way you've changed now, which is actually your self-empowerment, your healing, is toxic and that you urgently need help. Maybe he'll say that you've become cold and emotionless, selfish. Yes, he might even call you narcissistic. And he will cast the good times you spent together in the most beautiful light and make you understand that, of course, this happiness was only possible with the person you were back then. So you have to go back to being the way you were because he can't do anything with this new version of you. And if all of that doesn't work either, then he might try to activate your willingness to help and break your resistance through the back door, so to speak, by creating some kind of crisis, which he, of course, brings about himself. For example, you want to leave him and he gets sick or becomes unemployed, whatever. And then you can't leave, then you have to help. He won't get tougher, but instead he'll become softer, more vulnerable. He can be really sugar sweet now. And that's the moment that's really dangerous, because that's the moment when you might forget your hard-earned boundaries and strengths. They are still there, yes, but you might forget them and believe that he has finally changed, because something inside you might still be hoping that he will change, or that he has finally changed now, and that all the time, all the discussions you had with him, all the energy you put into this relationship has finally paid off after all. He will present himself as reformed, he'll practice self-criticism, and this is a very important phase where you need to stay fully aware, because this phase isn't really genuine, but it can be very intense. It's one of the most dangerous forms of manipulation because you believe the moment you've waited for so long has finally come. And that's how he can pull you back into his reach, into his sphere of influence, if you don't stay aware. It's possible that in the process, he'll use your own healing path as a weapon against you. Sort of like, yes, you're so much further along than I am now, so you should be able to forgive me, and you should be willing to give us another chance to trust me again, and so on. Interestingly, he won't admit that he feels bad, even though you can see it or he's acting that way. But he can't say it out loud. He also can't show any real remorse. But he will make you feel like you have to be there now. You have to be there for him. But then, very slowly, almost imperceptibly, once you're back in his reach, he gradually returns to his old patterns of behavior. He never really changed. He only changed his strategy, you see. And it's so important to understand that while you are emotionally connected to the narcissist, he has little empathy and feels things very differently. He needs your energy, he lives off of it, and that's why your interactions are more like transactions to him. It sounds harsh, but that's how it is. They are carried out based on his internal programs. It's also interesting when you really leave his field for good, meaning you actually end the relationship. He won't forget you, and he'll also make sure that you can't forget him so quickly. He will contact you spontaneously again and again, suggesting that you are still important to him, even after a long time. But here again, you should see the narcissist for what he is, instead of getting lost in romantic interpretations. For him, it's not a real feeling, it's a strategy. Maybe he'll need you again one day, so he tries to keep you on the back burner. Maybe you'll take the bait again one day, and that way you can't quite forget him. He doesn't like that you're absent, but it's not real longing. It's a threat to his world, his territory. He keeps you on his radar and steps back onto the stage whenever the time is right for him. By then you might have already forgotten how destructive and toxic everything was with him. You resonate with narcissists for as long as you are susceptible to manipulation, because you yourself are not in your own power. The more you've cleared things up within yourself, love yourself, trust yourself, and think and act with your own authority, the less a narcissist can get a foothold with you. You're completely uninterested in his emotional drama, and you disarm him with your very being, even without saying a single word. So let's move on to the final question. Can a narcissist heal? Well, I want to answer that with a yes right from the start. A narcissist can definitely heal, and I'll explain why in a moment. But if you're in a situation where you still see yourself as a victim of a narcissist, then you are absolutely not the right person to help him heal. That simply has to be clear. It will always play out the way I've just described. You should really stay out of it. Please don't let yourself be lured into this role of the savior as long as you're still deeply entangled yourself. For you, the most important thing is that you don't try to heal him with patience, understanding, and all the explanations in the world, because you are his supply, not his healing. The patterns have to be broken first. Narcissists generally find it difficult to admit to themselves that they have an issue at all, or are even narcissistic. That's why I didn't make this podcast for narcissists, but rather for the people who have to deal with them. But if it actually gets to the point where a narcissist is willing to enter a healing process, then he can most definitely, and perhaps even relatively quickly, be helped. If he is willing to face his own pain, then anything is possible. The narcissist doesn't come off well in this podcast, I know that. But narcissism is ultimately just a collection of very specific layers of ego that have formed through hurts and distortions, and especially through neglect, primarily during childhood and adolescence. The inflated ego is simply his armor. These are emergency programs, survival programs that are running. The narcissist soothes his own discomfort, his own shame, his own helplessness, all of his own deficits, through these transactions with you or with others. This repeatedly gives him the short-term feeling that he is great. The narcissist is not strong, although he appears to be. His facade is often very strong, but he can only maintain it as long as others are weak and play along in his theater. He always has to be better, he always has to be able to measure and compare himself, to rate himself as better, and to somehow, at the end, at least in his own eyes, come out as the winner. Otherwise, his house of cards collapses. Perhaps at some point in his life, showing feelings was punished with indifference, shaming, whatever it may be. And ever since then, he outsources his feelings and projects them onto others. There are many points where one can start to heal all of this. And there are very, very big chances to get through it relatively quickly because, as I've said, narcissism is really just layers of ego. With THEKI, we find the roots of all layers and transform them. In the case of the narcissist, we go deep into these layers of hurt, neglect, emotional coldness, inferiority, and so on, and we transform the causes. And at the same time, of course, the inherent ability within every person is strengthened. For example, primal trust, truthfulness, and yes, also vulnerability as a strength. And so, step by step, he can recognize for himself which destructive behavioral patterns are still at play, and also decide for himself to let them go and to be more and more authentic with himself and with others. And finally, a few lines for you. Everything that comes into your life serves your growth, even the narcissist. Life repeatedly extends its hand to you, gives you the chance to free yourself from old, limiting, destructive patterns. The narcissist is merely an actor in your self-created reality. You have the power to completely reshoot your reality film. All it takes is your heart's yes to yourself. It's wonderful that you exist. See you soon.